So I'd like to officially welcome everybody to the Gallagher Physical Security Panel series that we've been running. This is one of multiple sessions that we'll have going in the lead up to GSX. I'm honoured to be moderator. My name is Paul Wilson. I'm the Director of Technical Services for Gallagher Americas, and I'm based out of our Atlanta office. And today we have gathered to explore how the industry can move from reactive to proactive. Really, it's looking at the shifting paradigms in physical security operations, right? So as an industry, the traditional version of proactive security has really been in identifying physical areas of interest, hardening them with some hardware, whether that's door hardware, other elements, cameras, whatever, and then really adding different layers of those hardware elements, right? And then we've been used to triggering responses that are effectively exactly that, like a response to what's going on and having a mechanism for people to respond and do different things in relationship to those events that are happening, and with different levels of escalation and other bits and pieces that are going on. So we've assembled this panel today to really explore how that's shifting and how different elements of technology that they'll talk about are impacting the change in that paradigm. With that, I'm thrilled to announce the panel of industry experts that we have, and they're going to share their insights and experiences. So I'm going to let them briefly walk through and introduce themselves. Then I'm going to quickly explain the rules of engagement, and we'll kick off once that's done. So I'm going to hand it over to, first of all, it will be Mark.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So I'm Mark Johnson. I'm from Milestone. Milestone is a video management company, if you haven't heard of us. And I'm really happy to be on here. I think we've got a variety of folks that I understand that are going to either be on here or be watching later. And my background is a little unique, or maybe a little bit different than some of the others, although I don't know everyone on our call here today. But I was a police officer for a dozen years. I went to work for a little startup company called Taser when they were a little tiny company back in the day, and did all of their research and development. And then I got bored of that, and I went and decided I was going to go into healthcare, because as a police officer, I was in a county hospital. So I was worked for a hospital and ended as a COO in that organization. And then I got bored from that, and then I went to a university. So I've got a little bit of a smattering of everything in my background, and I was the end user and or the customer for a lot of these technologies that we're going to talk about today, or that you see on this panel here today. Mine is always around, what is, or the question was, what really defines a reactive approach to security, and what are some of the limitations around that? And when I look at that question and try to answer that question, is it really involves a lot about ROI. And so knowing how we're going to look at this, and how are we going to solve problems with this, and how are we going to be proactive instead of reactive, and what are some of those pitfalls with that. And when we look at that, obviously we all know about reactive approach versus a proactive approach, right? And what are some of those limitations? So the way that I would always explain it, and that I like to explain it to customers now and to my former peers, whatever organization it was, is it's kind of like navigating a ship through turbulent waters. Only reacting when storms are hitting, that can be really dangerous. That can be perilous. So, and you need to be able to change that course with some foresight and preparation. So in the ship example, right, that's going to be weather maps and looking at what the trends are and time of year and everything else. And this analogy, I think, really holds true when we're talking about security, where proactive measures can significantly enhance our ability to prevent and manage some of these threats effectively. So when we look at defining that approach, it's if we're reactive, it's only after the issue arrives. Well, that strategy kind of involves reacting to breaches, incidents, or threats after they occurred. Maybe you're looking at surveillance footage from your video. Maybe you're looking at your access control methods. Maybe you're looking to see who is in the building, both as employees and also as visitors. So how are we doing that? And trying to understand after the incident what went wrong. Some of these issues, and when you start talking about security, I always also talked about is that traditionally, like in healthcare, it's the healthcare providers they're the farmers. They go out and they bring all the money into the hospital. And security is always seen as just the spenders, right? Or the consumers of what that's being brought on. And so sometimes creating funding to create a safe environment is really, really difficult for that physical security person. But if we start to put it into an ROI measurement and looking at relying solely on reactive measures, that really often leads to higher costs. And I've got all the stats, and feel free to contact me. I've got all the real papers behind this, not just me making it up. But if you look at the Journal of Applied Research and Security, it shows that reactive responses can incur up to 50% higher cost per incident compared to proactive strategies. And so those additional resources that are required to handle that follow-up, manage all those disruptions, are an increased cost. As an example, if you have 20 security incidences annually with an average cost of $10,000 per incident, shifting to a proactive approach could potentially save you up to $100,000 just by reducing these costs. Then there's increased incident impact. So a reactive approach often results in longer recovery times and more extensive operational disruptions. So again, looking at the International Journal of Information Security indicates that recovery efforts measures can take 40% longer compared to proactive approaches. So I think you're starting to get the idea about how it pays to be proactive rather than reactive. But let's not just talk about the impact to the organization, but let's also talk about the impact to people. Right now, we're in a huge struggle finding anyone that wants to do anything public safety related. Police, fire, paramedics, medical, security staff, everyone is having this issue. So environments, though, that rely heavily on reactive security measures really does impact employee morale. And so if you look at occupational health and psychology, that journal, they show that settings like this can have a 25% higher level of stress amongst staff members that impacts productivity, satisfaction. They'll move on, and we all know that issue behind that. So a reduction of employee stress by 25% could translate to $1.25 million in revenue annually for a company with 100 employees if that employee is generating $50,000 in annual revenue. Well, again, how do we talk about security staff and looking at revenue? And then we've got inefficiency, incident management, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at cost savings on incident management, we can look at proactively, we can reduce incident-related costs. And some of that can be cost by up to 50% by being reactive, being proactive rather than being reactive. So again, a company that's looking at 20 incidents per year at $10,000 each might look at about $100,000 annually by reducing these costs. We've already talked a little bit about morale, and we've talked a little bit about disruption costs. But again, if you look at a disruption, and not talking about anyone specific, but if we look at what happened, 2 Fridays ago with a rollout to an operating system, that is a disruption. And you saw what happened both with people at airports, people at banking centers, people trying to get home, et cetera. But let's look at this in your organization, whether, again, it be healthcare, education, manufacturing, whatever else it is. But if you're implementing real-time monitoring, take a look at those response protocols. They can reduce or decrease that time by 50%. So again, 10 days, again, we can start to talk about some of those costs that are involved in that. And then improved incident detection and prevention, proactive security measures using improved badging systems, access control, video management systems can lead to a 20% increase in incident detection rates and a 15% reduction in overall security breaches. And that comes from a study by White and Lee that was just done in 2023. So we're not referencing stuff from back in the 1980s. We're looking at real time, pretty close to the heart as far as where we are today on July 31st, 2024. So this is only a year old, and that's really pretty relevant when we start to look at journal articles, and we're looking at some of the studies that have been done. And another great way that
this is your warning to move on. We got heading towards the close.
I was told I had an hour and a half, so I'm going. You cut me off whenever you want.
I'm a bully.
I'll keep going. But again, if you look at proactive versus reactive, again, I've got all these studies that I used to talk about when I used to go for my budgets and when I used to go and talk about different security issues, and I still talk about them today. It's the same thing. Sports analogies are there. Teams that rely on defense, they say defense wins. Well, you got to score too. And there's all the studies, whether it be football, baseball, basketball, what have you, they're all showing that proactive as well as defensive, but you also need to be proactive and think ahead about what another team might be doing to you. And same thing, what is someone that's going to maybe cause issues in your organization or to your organization going to do? So while reactive measures are necessary, relying solely on them can be really costly and inefficient. So adapting proactive security measures like video management, access control, comprehensive badging systems, both for visitors and employees, can really achieve significant cost savings for you, reduce recovery times, increase employee productivity, and really create a more secure and positive work environment. Thanks for any attention that you gave me. I appreciate it. But let's try to navigate some of these security challenges with some foresight and preparation, ensuring a smoother operation and a safer workplace for everyone. And I think that's why we're all here today. Thanks for your time very much.
Awesome, Mark. That was really good. I'm just going to throw it open to the other panelists quickly to see if they have any questions they want to ask you in regard to what you just talked about.
Yeah, I kind of have a question for you, Mark. So as you're going through this whole budgeting process, I always take a look at how can we use things that we have or tools we have for more than one use case, right? So we have obviously the security use case for access control and video, but within that, there are a litany of other things we can now use, not only video and access control for, right, that we couldn't use 10 years ago through things like analytics. Was it ever part of the I guess, the cycle, the budget cycle you had, looking at what other departments can I go to maybe draw some money to solve some of the problems we have because it does affect their environment?
Absolutely. I talk about this quite a bit. A lot of my peers that were security managers, directors, vice presidents, what have you, security in a lot of organizations, the only thing that security can really dictate is who gets to look at video and who has which access control credentials on their card. And they hold it very tight because it's the only thing they can control. And so what I used to do is I used to give video out or access control, or when a visitor came or badged in, let those units know what's going on. For example, we redesigned one of our surgery centers. It took 3.5 minutes to walk out to tell Tony's family that Tony came out of surgery and they'll bring him back. Well, that's 3 minutes out there and 3 minutes back. So as soon as I gave them access to real-time video to see if Tony's family is out there, they just saved potentially 7 minutes because Tony's family went out to get some fresh air, went to the cafeteria. So starting to incorporate those, or where I was from in Minnesota, letting the outdoor crew that had 7.5 miles of sidewalk to plow, and we know how snow drifts and blows, instead they can look at it real time. Same thing with access control. If we gave a visitor badge out to a unit, the ICU, it immediately would tell the ICU they just gave out a visitor badge and you're going to expect Tony's family coming up to visit Tony. So utilizing these as a whole host around this is great. It's the same thing when we talk about cameras out in intersections. You might see the city has a camera, the state's got a camera, the traffic department has a camera. Instead of doing that, let's get one camera that they can all share and let's add some layers on there, whether it be analytics or whether it be other sensors, et cetera, et cetera. So sharing a lot of those resources, because it is ultimately one person's, or it's the organization's resource in whole.
Awesome. All right, team. With time constraints, I'm gonna, if you have any other questions, we'll keep them in your mind and we'll fire them at Mark towards the end of the session. If anybody in the chat has any questions, anybody listening has any questions, please throw them into the chat and we will aggregate any questions that you do pop in there for the panelists at the end. So I'm going to move us on now and have Tony introduce himself. And Tony, if you just kick off into your subject and we'll rotate through.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Paul. So I'm Tony Babish. I'm the Director of Sales Command. I've been in the security industry for maybe about 15 to 17 years, somewhere in that ballpark. But mostly on the sales side. I am a computer scientist by nature, so I'm very curious about technology. I'm always kind of digging deep into things when I probably shouldn't be. So I definitely, still do some light programming. I don't do as much as I used to do 20 years ago, but definitely the technology piece is really the interesting side for me, and where I spend most of my time, really. And my question really was around, how do we take and go from proactive to reactive? What does that process, or reactive to proactive? What does that process really look like, right? And and I'm a very practical thinker. So as I go through this, I mean, it's very practical examples that I'll use, right? So, I mean, obviously the first thing in most customers or companies are already doing this, right? You have to assess your risk, right? You have to get a current evaluation of where your current state is. Where are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are the reactive measures that you have in place? And defining, obviously, the threats and vulnerabilities, classifying everything to the right bucket of high and medium classification, and then really taking and looking at what countermeasures you can put in place to help reduce risk in those areas, right? And that spans everything from physical security to cybersecurity, right? You got to take a look at it all today. It's not just one bucket; it's both buckets, and those things are really moved together, and they have moved together over the last 10 years, right? So then once you've kind of assessed everything and where you're at, obviously you want to create a desired state. So what is the desired state you want to get to? And that's really where the proactive security planning really comes into place. So if you're getting a lot of alarms in your call center or in your SOC or your NOC, how do we start reducing some of those alarms that aren't really necessary through using technology? There's stuff out there we can use today to do that. And then based upon your security operations plans, your emergency operation planning, really understanding how do we fit the technology in there, right? So now we step into the different layers of technology and obviously layers of security, and really taking a look at where things were. So security used to be very, I guess it was reactive. That changed about 10 years ago. It was very forensic, versus today I think it's extremely proactive because we have different tools today like video analytics. We have better APIs than we had before. Things are easier to integrate together. So it's taking those various systems, pulling them together, and understanding what is the scenario I have at this specific location or the door, and how do I use the technology I have today to tie it together to not only get a better security experience, but really it's about user experience too. We're not just trying to keep people out or detect things from happening. We're also trying to get the user experience to be enhanced, whether that's in retail, whether that's in a NERC SIP environment, or whether that's in a hospital, right? We all have to worry about user experience. And usually security is one of those things that kind of takes away from user experience. So how do we make the experience better for them? So in a quick example, so if I'm using Gallagher and I have an access control scenario and I'm at a door, right? There's different events that happen in an access control system. Obviously, I can present a badge or try to get in with my phone and be able to open up a door, right? Well, what happens when that doesn't happen, right? So when access is denied, how do we communicate with the person at the door? So, and I didn't really mention, I work for Commend. Commend is a communication platform. So we're unified communications for the security space. So in terms of communication, it's basically broadcasting a message, but also maybe changing a piece of signage that says, your access has been denied, a call is being placed for you, or your access has been denied for this specific reason. Maybe it's a training requirement they didn't fulfill, and sometimes the access control system will document all that and will not allow them in that door, because to get in that data center, they have to be certified by a certain date, right? So these are just examples that we see being used all the time. Another one in the access control world is a door's propped open, right? A door's propped open, forced entry, whatever. We can create those scenarios where we're giving live feedback to that person at the door. That just enhances that user experience, and really, to me, is a proactive measure, right? You're not waiting for that event to go into the security operations center to take care of it. You're really kind of getting in front of it by having it somewhat of an automated process in the end. Right. And I think that the not the last thing, but one of the last things is once you kind of have and assess your proactive security measures. You have your security operations plan, your emergency operation plans in place. You decided what technology you want to go with. You know how it's going to integrate. The hardest part is change management. I think anybody knows that's ever managed people in general. It doesn't matter who you're managing. Change management is one of the hardest things to do. So you have to deploy it, you have to train. You have to train, and remind people of what the policies are and how to work within the SOPs and review them on a constant basis, right? So again, that's one that sometimes it's best to bring in an expert to come and help you do that change management side of it. But if you've been in management for long enough, you know kind of how people react to things, and you've got to really kind of step up your game and really to do more training and get that down. So, and the last thing is, once you're done with post implementation, people are done. Is really just assessing the current state and making sure that it's in the desired direction you want to go. So the check, act, plan, do. You want to now check if what you're doing by measuring, acting upon the measurement, planning, and actually then doing some of the things that you put out to do and the changes you want to make.
Awesome, thanks, Tony. I'm going to throw it out to our other panelists and see whether anybody has any questions for Tony.
I had a quick one around that at the end of the process, Tony. I loved hearing that you do the checking of the metrics. I'm curious what percentage of customers typically, definitely follow through with that, checking their metrics to make sure that the investment that they're making in the services or the modernization efforts that they're making tie back to that success that they were expecting.
I wouldn't know the percentage more. I mean, I would have probably guessed it's less than 50, if that, right? And I think it's a matter of people being so busy these days and having multiple hats that maybe it isn't happening as proactively as it should be. And I think there's an underutilization of systems as well, too, right? You have these powerful systems we put in place, and they're not really understood as much as they need to be. And I think the education needs to happen from a manufacturer's perspective for our customers to really understand what is everything that's possible, and then imagining the scenarios and really thinking of the art of the possible of what we can do next. So I don't know the exact percentage, but unfortunately, I think we go in front of a lot of customers and they aren't doing this on a regular basis. Some are really world-class customers, really kind of going through this process, and others just kind of leave it where it's at, and the status quo is where it's at. So it's really kind of driving them to start thinking a little bit differently sometimes is really the key.
Yeah, that's great. That's where my head was going, given the process you were describing with the audience that we're presenting to. Yeah, just underscoring that follow-up to confirm that metrics are met, success criteria are hit. That makes it that much more repeatable for certainly the vendor, but also the customer.
Sure.
Yeah. So Tony, the technology utilized today has obviously changed the metrics and the analytics you're able to do. In the communication space, what sort of analytics are you using there, or how do analytics come into play there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. I mean, you look at obviously audio analytics and detecting certain events. That's growing and it's becoming more prevalent. I think it might be the next wave in the security industry is really understanding what we're hearing and how we use that. I don't think people understand fully how to use audio analytics yet. There's also this side of it too. So if you think about what we're doing from a communication perspective, every single piece of speech that comes through our system, you can take that and now break that down, because you can take speech to text, and then you can take that data of what the conversation's about and look for how do we solve problems proactively there as well too. That's a good point, Scott. I mean, it's really taking the data from those conversations and knowing that, if I have 1,000 calls coming in a week, if 10% of those calls are coming in and they're the same thing, how do I solve that with something what Commend calls is Ivy, but you use conversational AI to actually solve some of these problems and get people processed through a door or through a gate by simply automating the process and solving for those problems. So yeah, I think really the analytics side right now from us, our perspective is obviously the audio side, but really more on understanding through speech to text engines and taking that text and analyzing for what the main intents are that people are calling in for.
Very good.
All right, and Scott, that was a very well placed question, because thank you, Tony. Thank you for your time and words of wisdom there. And Scott, you made the perfect segue into an introduction for yourself and your segment.
Thanks a lot, Paul. So my name is Scott Cattell. I know you can't tell by my youthful appearance, but I've been in this industry about 40 years now. Started off in the integration side of things, hands-on tool belt, worked up through management, got into hardware and became an AHC, and got involved with Salto shortly after that. So I've got kind of more of a physical hardware electronics and actual physical hardware background than I do data analytics, but all the things we're using today are involved and contribute to that data collection. You're collecting data every time people go through a door, walk in front of a camera, you're being analyzed. And the way that data analytics are being used to be proactive is by analyzing vast amounts of data from various sources, cameras, access control, sensors, perimeter control systems, et cetera. But I guess one point about that is that it's hard to be proactive out of the gate without first having a lot of these systems in place, the sensors and whatnot, to collect those vast amounts of data. So I guess it'd be two phases I'd look at. Would be someone with a well-established security environment could utilize all of the data they're collecting to be proactive, but other people are going to be at a point where they need to start putting proper data collection items in place, if you will, to become more proactive down the road. And I think so I think being proactive is the way you want to be, but you have to get there first by building that infrastructure to collect the data to do that. The data analytics today are very powerful with AI involved. You can quickly go through video systems, data collection from access control and whatnot, and look for unusual behavior patterns that can tell you where to allocate resources. By using those analytics, you're allocating resources where they're needed and not just because someone said we have a physical person standing at that door watching this. The video analytics, I've seen amazing growth in the video analytics over the years. And, in my opinion, you're able to watch, as an example, 4 gates to a facility with a camera, and you can draw analytics from that why does one person go backwards against the stream of traffic every day at 4 o'clock when everyone's going the other direction? I'm going to put some resources there at that gate and have a look at that. So you've got behavioral analytics as well. We can look at how somebody's walking. If they're walking differently, maybe they're carrying something. If they're walking in a different direction, we can also analyze, normal patterns and flows through doors, through gates, through cameras, et cetera, and look for anomalies. So with the integration of Internet of Things is the buzzword, but everything we're putting in these days is connected to some sort of a database, either locally or via the cloud. So we're able to put together pictures of normal behaviors on a facility that would alert us to unusual behavior on the facility. So I think getting to a proactive environment is where you need to be for the best economic use of resources and for, I think, just proper response and whatnot. You need to be proactive as possible. I'm not, as I say, I'm not a computer specialist. I'm a physical electronics, access control, alarms, sensors, that sort of background. So I've got a lot of history in the collection of the data. I don't have a lot of history in the analytics of the data, but what I've seen coming out these days is just amazing, what we can do with the data we're collecting. I don't know if anyone's got any questions further to that or anything about technology, but I'll throw it out there.
Perfect. Panel, over to you.
I would just say, I think on the analytics side, I think analytics, when I was using them as an end user, I don't want to say they were fairly basic, but line crossing, et cetera, et cetera. But what you're describing, right, is the anomaly analytics. So it's not just crossing the line, but like the example you gave, going the wrong way at 4 o'clock every day. So having the AI also do a lot of that investigative. And I think, so mine isn't really a question, mine's more of a comment, that the analytics are getting smarter and smarter every day, and we're seeing that with the integrations that companies are using with our video management system. So it's really fascinating, and in some ways, I wish I was still an end user because I don't want to say it's getting easier because it's also getting harder. But the anomaly detection techniques that the systems are pushing out now are just amazing. And back onto Tony's. Same thing, because it's analytics. When he was talking about audio analytics, the audio analytics are just phenomenal now too, and more so if you start looking at audio analytics, you're going to be able to maybe hear something even before you can see something, and having that audio analytic interpret and maybe fire off or trigger lockdowns or trigger again, just going back to even the stuff that's been out there for a while, right? Gunshot detection and everything else, but now it's getting sharper and easier to use with a higher propensity of not being a fault, or a lesser propensity of being a false alarm versus what we saw in the past. So audio analytics, we're even seeing audio analytics being used inside hospitals, inside care facilities, to listen to the different IV pumps making different beeps and boops to determine outcomes or to alert staff, et cetera, et cetera. So the analytics side, whether it be video or audio or even access control analytics, are just phenomenal nowadays, and they just continue to get better every day.
Yeah, one example I love of analytics. It's a basic analytic, but it's very powerful. And we do this with access control, with electronic locks. But you can actually detect the difference between somebody walking down the corridor with one credential, trying them on multiple doors. That's a scenario to create a lockdown or an incident. The other is if someone is at one particular door introducing multiple credentials, like they found a pile of credentials, or someone standing at the door just trying the same credential over and over again and is probably either at the wrong door or somebody made an error in their credential. But just those basic things are very powerful when, deploying resources at a facility to go investigate different things going on. So it's really exciting watching all the things happen. And I'm kind of a technology geek, so I love keeping up on all the latest technology and the cool things we can do today.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. We'll move on now to the ever-patient Mort, and over to you.
Excellent. Yep. Thanks, Paul. Mort Jensen. I run global channels and partnerships for Envoy. And that's actually an excellent segue. I'm going to capture, Scott, technology. I've been a technologist my entire career. And that's actually why I wanted to comment on, really technologies play in a proactive stance for security operations, and specifically in the physical environment. Starting my career at Siemens Building Technologies, I sold temperature control, fire alarms, security, lighting back in the late 90s. And I've been on again, off again in, facilities and building operations throughout my career. But really at my heart is startup environments, and really working for organizations that are taking technology and using that to really disrupt what might be the status quo. So I was, an early employee at Meraki, which was Wi-Fi disruption. Ignite was file sharing and synchronization of data from your laptops and desktops to the cloud. That was disruptive. My previous company here prior to Envoy was Orion Labs, which was disrupting team communications at the front line with push-to-talk solutions. And really the core is people don't buy technology for technology's sake. They buy technology to solve a problem or improve an operation, which really kind of brings me to what Envoy has done. And not to sell Envoy, it's really categorically tied to that physical operation. We pioneered the category of visitor management. It didn't exist 12 years ago. A very specialized, type of thing that was built by some very big technology companies. But the founding principle was to make this available to the masses. So if you think about it, 12, 13 years ago, people were signing pads of paper to get access to a building. And throughout today, I've heard people mention a number of times when visitors come into the office. So talk about leveraging technology to improve that physical operations in the facility, let's first control who's got access to the building. And let's automate that and leverage automation that's possible with a tablet in the front of the office, and then tie into third-party systems to help automate workflows. So thinking about, sensors, artificial intelligence, automation, not necessarily focusing on where I'm at today. Companies are already purchasing and making investments in these solutions and tooling for other aspects of their business, whether it be call centers or marketing automation or preventive maintenance systems that are incorporating AI to let people know, hey, time to do some preventative maintenance on this boiler or chiller or piece of equipment. Physical operations, the security personnel have been experiencing modernization as it relates to incident management tooling, or like I said in my previous company, modernization of how they communicate. Yep, many will still use that brick radio, which incorporates tremendous technology. But what about moving to that smart device form factor and how that can uplift operations and incorporate automations and that sort of thing? So I think, really, it comes down to, just to kind of summarize, organizations don't buy technology just for technology's sake. They leverage what's possible with the different tooling where innovations have been incorporated. And, I suppose plugging the people that are on the audience here that are coming from security integrators. These organizations live and breathe the technology industry, and they're staying on top of trends that are happening in access control or video surveillance or visitor management, as an example. And they can help you kind of inform what's possible so that you can learn, things that are happening with, with Commend or Salto or other technologies, leveraging the advances that are happening in this space.
Mort, you mentioned a couple companies that you were involved with that were very disruptive. I'm gonna put you on the spot maybe, but what do you see disruptive coming down the road in this in security in general?
Yeah, so if you think about, the trends that we're seeing with AI as an example, there's opportunities to proactively use, and again, I guess I'll plug Envoy here, thinking about, leveraging what's possible today with a platform like Envoy to understand who's entering the office. It's disruptive to identify a blacklisted set of personnel that may or may not be allowed to get access to the facility. The ID badge scanning is something that can be quickly done right there on site. We just actually announced yesterday a new solution, the first of its kind. Virtual front desk is the virtualization of personnel that normally would be there to greet. Though that personnel can now be repurposed to do other workplace activities, and virtualized to a single resource that's shared across multiple offices. That incorporates automation that essentially frees up that disruptive capability for visitors to take care of what they need to take care of as they check in, but also personnel freeing up those the time for them to do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Any other panelists have a question?
Just general to the group, but at Salto we have a pretty high adoption rate of mobile credentials. I'm just wondering, anybody here in general, are mobile credentials being used in any proactive way, any analytics with mobile credentials for access, for visitors, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I changed out our entire facility. It was a higher ed university, all into mobile. We did have a little kickback because some students didn't want to load someone else's proprietary software, et cetera. So we offered them a physical card too. But the digital card really provides increase in security, right? You can turn it on, you can turn it off. Most students, if you start looking at student uses and even adult uses, the likelihood, Scott, of me giving you my phone with my digital credential, with my password that you can access all of my other apps or whatever else, the credential that we are using at the time, is unlikely. It's also a higher propensity, and we saw this through the trending that we did at our university. Students were no longer forgetting their ID because they will never forget their phone behind, in most cases, that way too. And then actually from an ROI, again, I love ROIs because they drive, is that our cost to push out a digital credential was less when you looked at the staff power, the FTE that has to print it, that has to load the machine, has to fix all the drivers, et cetera, was a lot less expensive than actually issuing out a digital credential. So I think, especially in a university setting or any setting, business setting, from a security factor, I think they're much more secure, because I'd certainly give you my card to get into a door that you might not have access to, but it's unlikely that I would give you my my phone and my password to the golden kingdom that's on my phone these days.
Good point. Good point.
We're seeing a greater propensity as well in the business sector, as opposed to the schools. For us, Mark, you're saying you saw that with schools, with enterprise, with businesses that have already incorporated some sort of access control system. There's a greater propensity to adopt that mobile credential, and really, if you're living and breathing in your smartphone for your own business, and obviously plugging the integration with Gallagher here, it becomes a logical extension of my experience on a smartphone to then use that to then gain access to as an example for the purpose of this audience, right? A Gallagher, set up access control system.
Right.
Awesome. I'm just going to throw a reminder out to the audience there. If anybody does have a question for any of the panelists, please do pop it into the chat, and we'll be more than happy to address it at this point. And for the panelists, as you've all been talking and I've been listening, just one thing popped into my mind. I wonder, have we defined, what does actually proactive mean? And by that, I mean, in terms of security, I don't think it just stops there, right? I believe proactive starts to go a little bit more into what Mort was referencing, and Tony mentioned it in some areas there as well. It's about operational benefit and operational efficiencies to the customer, right? To their business, and what does that actually deliver in terms of day-to-day things that they have to do. So I'm going to throw that back out at you and say, what are your thoughts around what does actual proactive status mean, and what are your thoughts around how we're moving ever towards that tighter integration, not just to the platforms that we are all representing here, but to many other platforms that are embedded within an organization? Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to comment. I forget who said it. Was it you, Tony, or Mark? Someone said the beeps and boops that the equipment kind of emits. I think thinking about proactivity around those security operations, understanding that these types of companies that represent this audience that we have here, this panel, sitting behind those beeps and boops is likely, and certainly in the case of Envoy, workflows that I'm audibly letting somebody know that's in the proximity that something has happened, an anomaly has happened, or a threshold has been hit by a sensor. But the proactivity happens on the back end through an integration that notifies a system that talks to other people that might not be in the facility, or automatically creates a trouble ticket or an incident management ticket that allows for the physical security personnel to react proactively to an anomaly. So I think that's how it manifests from our perspective, is what's happening on the back end with those integrations to really allow that proactivity to happen.
Yeah, I think you can kind of use proactivity with automation in a similar sense. It's not the same sentence, but I think the more you can automate processes wisely, right? Because you can automate things that don't make sense. But if you can automate things and like Mort was saying, use multiple systems, And integration is obviously the key, right? Because there's no way that any manufacturer is going to solve every problem, but as manufacturers, we come together to solve larger problems by doing what we do best and pulling those things together to automate that process in some way, shape, or form. Some people are willing to give up a little bit of risk to automate a much bigger process, and vice versa. So it just depends on people's risk tolerance for certain things. But you really, to me, it's and the other thing, kind of what I've noticed is that the situation awareness in the command center, in the security operations center, has grown tremendously, right, over the past 10 years. Situation awareness is at really good levels, I guess you could say. But I don't think situation awareness on the ground where the transaction is happening necessarily is good. I think it's still lacking. And that's where I think that you can use audio and digital signage to be able to alert people of certain events or there's a transaction happening that they need to know about. And that's really kind of where we've been spending a lot of our time and attention.
We've got a question coming from Christopher. Does anyone in the group see AI as a potential negative in the security world?
I think it could be. I mean, I think it could be. It just depends how you use it, right? I mean, you have to limit its capabilities. If you don't have ways of limiting its capabilities, then you're kind of opening yourself up to possibly getting yourself in a bad scenario. And I'm more or less talking about the automation process. And if you think about conversational AI, what's the response that it gives to somebody? Then what does it do with that response? To limit those interactions, because if you don't do that, and you let it kind of go willy-nilly, you're gonna run into problems and possibly a security situation you weren't intending it to do.
Yeah, and I mean at this point, AI is basically looking at all the data and giving you an opinion or taking an action or doing something, but it's only as good as the data going into it. Conversational chat bots and whatnot are only as good as the information they can find out there that we've fed them. So I think AI can be a very, very powerful tool as long as we're feeding it accurate and relevant information and not just letting it roam the web looking for answers. But if it's very specifically built into our integration and built into our system and given specific tasks, I think it can analyze vast amounts of data that we'll never be able to, and that our computers can but don't have the logic to. So I don't see it as a threat, as long as Tony mentioned, as long as it's contained and controlled and used within the security environment.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that last comment, Scott, within the security environment brings to mind really the importance of not applying AI, as I said earlier, technology for the sake of technology. You can't apply it in a generalized sense. You need to take into consideration that specific industry, that specific lexicon of language that's used in physical security environments, and the personnel that are talking into it, and really, as the others have said, put guardrails on it. Make sure that you're not relying on it solely for the sake of AI and automating things. Make it specific to your task, make it specific to the application. It's happening in other parts of the industry of the world. Restaurants are incorporating AI, but they're making it very specific to those particular workflows of ordering, and it's happening within the medical industry, but very specific. You got to do that for the security industry to really minimize the potential negativity of AI, to answer Chris's question directly.
Mark, any thoughts from you? With your side of experience, I think this is a topic that probably comes up in that world a lot.
Yeah, I think it does. I certainly echo what everyone else said here in the group. I think I'm working with some clients now where the issue, again, to reference Scott, it's all about the data, right? And we know that bad data leads to bad outcomes, and scouring the web for answers. I mean, if I had this in college, I'd be dangerous, right? I'd be a NASA scientist at this point in time with all the data you can get. But as much of the good data you can get, you can also get bad. And so I'm seeing that there's I'm working with a couple different clients right now and a couple different companies where they want to house all the data, all the AI data internally, so it will not go out to the web for multiple reasons. One is anything that you enter in there, and it uses to learn off of other models. So you should not be putting sensitive information about, the next great product from Salto in there and say, what should we name this super duper lock or this or this or this? Because it's going to get out there. So that's part of it. So some of these folks that I'm working with, the three-letter agencies and such, they do not want any of that information going out there, but they still want AI to analyze, because back to everyone's point, it's going to be able to analyze quicker, faster, better, with likelihood of better results in a more efficient time factor than any one of us or five of us could put together in one sitting. But again, it goes back into the data and what's being put in there. And again, we've seen what's happened with social media, with people downvoting or deregulating some of the answers on some questions and upvoting, other answers on others. So there is no real source of truth anymore. I think the best source of truth is the old paper encyclopedia. But again, going back, you need to have real-time data. You can't reference, and again, that's why whenever I write papers, I try to reference something current, not something that happened back in the 70s or in the 80s, because we'd be talking about Betamax, and that isn't even it. Or Blu-ray. I mean, even Blu-ray is recent, but it's no longer, it's becoming less and less relevant at this point in time. Or the what was the other one, the HD disc or whatever, and that didn't even make it up off the ground. So again, I think it's all about data in, data out, and the relevance and accuracy of that data.
Yep.
Tony, any thoughts that you want to add to that?
No, not at all.
To Mort's point, Mort had talked about, about making sure, and you can have these if then whats, because I made the boops and bops comment. It is all about workflow, and workflow really is what AI is now. It's just a less smart, less intelligent rule factor that you're throwing into it, that if it sees this, same thing. If audio analytics hears this, or video analytics sees this, or the access control or the lock sees multiple cards being flashed, then do this. It's an if then that type of scenario. So it's been around for a long time. I mean, heck, we had AI with line detection crossing years and years and years ago. I mean, that is a form of AI in a general broad sense. But I think everyone now thinks of AI as ChatGPT, and it is much, much more than that today. But am I afraid of it? Yeah, a little bit. If it's done wrong.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the trust but verify statement rings very true with what you're talking about, right? It's about making sure that we verify the data, that we can build trust in the data that is correct, and then you can at least have some certainty that the answers being output by, or the items being generated, decisions being made by the AI are being made within the rule sets that were originally set. So I think that's well summarized. Well, at this point, we're approaching the end of our time here. I would like to thank very much all the members of the panel for participating. We do appreciate your time. We really do appreciate your thoughts and the information that you've delivered during this conversation. Thank you, everybody, for attending the session. And you'll see up on screen that there are some QR codes. So if anybody wants to discuss anything further in depth at GSX, scan the QR code and come and meet the panel. I'm sure that all of them will be more than happy to have a conversation with you and continue some of the topics that we were discussing here today. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience, and everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
See you.